Hi, my name is Sheena Roseanne Haysom. I'm the granddaughter of Derek and Nancy Haysom, who were murdered in Virginia in 1985. You may know this case from the Netflix series Till Murder Do Us Part, Soering versus Haysom. I've new information that will hopefully bring the true perpetrators to justice. There are two people who have been wrongly accused in this case. Jens Soering was wrongly accused of being convicted of murder, and my grandmother, Nancy Astor Benedict Haysom, was also wrongly accused of taking nude photographs of her daughter, my aunt, Elizabeth Roxanne Haysom, and it was even suggested that she sexually abused her. Jens did not kill my grandparents, and my grandmother, Nancy, did not take those nude photographs of Elizabeth or sexually abuse her. On March 13th, 2025, I wrote and sent a letter to Governor GovernorYoungkin of Virginia, asking him to grant an absolute pardon to Jens Soering. This letter, I will now read, will bring new light explaining what I know and what I have personally experienced. I'll also be posting more videos in the future, so please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Now here's my letter. Dated March 13th, 2025. Dear Governor Youngkin, my name is Sheena Roseanne Haysom. I'm the granddaughter of Nancy and Derek Haysom, who were murdered in Bedford County in Virginia in 1985. Jens Soering was convicted of committing this horrific crime. My half-aunt Elizabeth was also convicted as an accessory. She was Jens's girlfriend at the time and Nancy and Derek's daughter. Both Jens and Elizabeth served 33 years in prison and were released on parole 5 years ago. Jens was deported to his native Germany and Elizabeth to her native Canada. 2 years ago, Jens submitted a pardon petition to you based on new DNA findings developed by Professor Tom McClintock of the Liberty University. I'm asking you to grant Jens a full pardon so that the case can be reopened and reinvestigated. In this letter, I will provide new information about the real motive and the identities of the actual killers. I'm asking you to get personally involved because I want my grandparents' murderers to be brought to justice. Nancy, also known as Sita within our family, and Derek deserve that, and Jens deserves that too. The truth about these murders matters to me. That's why I spent considerable time researching the case in trial transcripts and informing myself about the DNA evidence and other forensic specifics. Ultimately, the truth will come out. I'm hoping you will have the courage to reveal and acknowledge it. The prosecutor at Jens's and Elizabeth trials, James Updike, gave a newspaper interview in which he said, I quote, "The motive for the crime has always been murky. Why her, Elizabeth's parents, are dead. That's something I could never understand. Prosecutor Updike should have looked closer. The motive was always very clear. Incestuous sexual abuse. Detectives found nude photographs of Elizabeth at the crime scene. However, this lead, was never investigated properly. In fact, every effort was made to deny that incestuous sexual abuse had ever happened. This went so far that Mr. Updike even pressured Elizabeth at her sentencing hearing to say that she was not sexually abused. James Updike, quote, "Was she, Nancy Haysom, a sexual abuser? Did she sexually abuse you? If she did, for God's sakes, clear her name now." Elizabeth said, I quote, "She did not sexually abuse me." End quote. Elizabeth repeated this statement at Jens's trial in 1990. It was only in a newspaper interview decades later that she finally admitted sexual abuse was the real motive for the murders. The statement of Elizabeth, taken by itself, is obviously true. Incestuous sexual abuse is the key to this whole case. It is the only possible motive that could explain the overwhelming brutality of this crime. But Elizabeth also lied in the interview quoted above by making two false claims. Jens was a killer, and it was her mother who sexually abused her. The truth is that Elizabeth herself actually participated in the murders, and it was another family member, not Elizabeth's mother, Sita, who sexually abused her. The same family member also sexually abused me and others. On March the 12th, 2025, on March the 13th, 2025, it is March the 12th, 2025. I filed criminal charges with Detective Brian Wilkinson, number 4931 of the Calgary Police Major Crimes Sexual Assault Unit against this family member, as well as against a second family member. The second family member also sexually abused me and my sister, as well as other female family members. For the record, I was also sexually abused by my paternal grandparent, Patrick Dare, who died some years ago. The Haysom and Benedict families, Sita was a Benedict, was riddled with incestuous sexual abuse spanning 3 generations in 4 countries. This is the horrible, dark truth that everyone in my family has been fighting to keep secret since 1985. But the real truth is even worse. My grandparents, Sita and Derek, were murdered because my grandmother had discovered yet another sexual relationship, this one involving Elizabeth and the first family member mentioned above. My grandmother had already begun to retaliate against the perpetrator, taking 3 steps that I know of. Then, to stop her from retaliating further, she and my grandfather were murdered by Elizabeth and 2 other family members mentioned above. In the newspaper interview quoted above, Elizabeth falsely blamed Jens for the murders and her mother for the sexual abuse because she did not want her own role in the murders to be revealed. Elizabeth hoped to gain parole by claiming to be an accessory who was not at the crime scene. She did not want the world to learn the truth that she actually actively helped the 2 other family members mentioned above to kill my grandparents. If that truth had been revealed, Elizabeth's hopes of gaining parole would have vanished. As a victim of sexual abuse myself, I can also tell you, Governor, that Elizabeth also felt great shame at having a sexual relationship with this first family member. That sexual relationship began as abuse, but later became voluntary. This created overwhelming fears of shame in Elizabeth, and she wanted to keep this awful truth hidden. My uncle, Dr. Howard Haysom, is the family spokesman on the murders of my grandparents. He testified at Elizabeth's sentencing hearing. I quote, "I personally am not satisfied with the explanation that her guilty plea provided. I think Elizabeth was in the house at the time of the crime, and I have reasons for that too." Also quoted by my uncle, Dr. Howard Haysom, "I respect and unequivocally disagree with the prosecutor's theory on that, i.e. Elizabeth's presence during the crime, and I will go into those reasons if you like, sir." Unquote. Yet the prosecutor, Updike, did not allow my uncle to give his reasons. I don't know why. I find his behavior here very puzzling, as in the passage quoted above, when he bullied Elizabeth into denying that she had been sexually abused. But first, please reflect on my uncle's statement, Governor. Just 2 years after the murders and 3 years before Jens's trial in 1990, my Uncle Howard openly told the court that the prosecution's theory on the case was wrong. Again, my Uncle Howard is a spokesman for the family. This is not just his personal belief, but that of the whole family knows to be true. No one in my family has ever believed that Jens killed my grandparents while Elizabeth remained in Washington, D.C. Throughout my childhood, family conversations about this case always clearly stated that Elizabeth put drugs into my grandparents' drinks. She was an addict, so she had access to narcotics. The drugs lowered my grandparents' resistance to the attack that followed. In early years, the 1980s and 1990s, members of my family, including my Uncle Howard, tried to convince themselves that after Elizabeth drugged my grandparents' drink, it was Jens who had then killed them. But in later years, the 2000s, and especially the 2010s, family conversations about his role changed completely. Now, many, perhaps most family members no longer believe that Jens was the killer. But no one in my family is willing to say so publicly. Because if Jens was not the killer, then what really happened to my grandparents in their home on March 30th, 1985? No one in my family wants to find out the answers because the answer will inevitably lead to the revelation of widespread incestuous sexual abuse. For my family, it's easier to keep Jens in the role of the fall guy and scapegoat. He is a shield that is protecting the family secret. I'm turning to you, Governor, because you have a history of helping victims of sexual abuse. Last year, you signed 3 bills helping people like me. Bills SB 731, Bill HB 1427, and Bill SB 201. You also granted a pardon to Scott Smith, who stood up for his daughter after she was sexually assaulted. Based on those actions, I believe you, unlike some politicians, are willing to expose sexual abuse in wealthy elite families like the Haysoms and Benedicts. My grandmother Sita was born a Benedict. Lady Nancy Astor was her great aunt and godmother. Families like mine use their money and social standings to prevent their perversions from being revealed. In that regard, they are no different than Jeffrey Epstein. It takes courage to reveal the truth in these cases, and not everyone has that courage. This may explain prosecutors Updike's strange behavior at Elizabeth's sentencing hearing, quoted above. It may also explain Governor Ralph Northam's strange decision to release Jens on a parole in 2019 instead of granting him a pardon. Please recall that on April 9th, 2018, 4 detectives publicly called on Mr. Northam to grant Jens a full pardon. Bedford County Senior Investigator Chuck Reed, Sheriff J.E. Chip Harding, Detective Sergeant Richard Hudson, and FBI Special Agent Stanley Lapkaz. You can find a link to their 1-hour press conference below. It is strange to me that 1.5 years later, Governor Northam went against the advice of these 4 experienced detectives. He denied Jens's pardon petition and released him on parole instead. In fact, Mr. Northam went on further and said that Jens's claim of innocence was, I quote, without merit, unquote. If that were true, Jens would be a killer who fooled 4 detectives into believing his lies. He would be a truly dangerous murderer and manipulator. How then he could possibly deserve parole then? Mr. Northam's statement does not make sense. I believe Governor Northam may have been afraid of the controversy following the grant of a pardon to Jens. A pardon would have been an acknowledgement that Elizabeth actively participated in the murders and therefore that incestuous sexual abuse was the motive. This is the secret my family wants to protect. My Uncle Howard is a good man, but in his role as a family spokesman, he would have attacked Governor Northam in the media following a grant of a pardon to Jens. A pardon would have meant that the case would be reopened, and my uncle and the rest of the family do not want that because then the family secret of sexual abuse will be exposed. I believe my Uncle Howard suspects that other members of the Haysom family, not just Elizabeth, were directly involved in the murders. He manages the family estate, so he knows that some family members may have had financial motives in addition to personal motives for these murders. But Uncle Howard does not want to delve into his suspicions on these matters because the truth he may find are just too awful. And he certainly does not want the police to delve into these matters. The question for you, Governor Youngkin, is where you stand on all of this, on the side of the victims of sexual abuse or on the side of the pedophiles and killers. As I said above, the extreme brutality of my grandparents' murder is likely to be the key of the whole case. Only a very powerful personal, emotional motive like sexual abuse could explain the overkill. And to top it off, there were nude photographs of the victim's daughter, Elizabeth, found at the scene. How could prosecutor Updike not realize that incestuous sexual abuse played a central role in the crime? I cannot believe he was that stupid or incompetent. I believe that his decision to ignore this lead must have been intentional to protect the good names of the Haysom and Benedict families. This makes me fear that the truth may be ignored again, a subject I will return to below. First, I want to point out that Jens did not have a powerful personal emotional motive that would lead to an overkill. He had met Sita and Derek only one time. There was no evidence that my grandparents opposed their relationship with Elizabeth. Her letters to Jens and his to her contain no mentions of parental opposition. Nobody at either trial testified that Sita or Derek disliked Jens. He was a non-entity to them. But the first family member I mentioned above had a very strong personal motive to kill my grandparents at that time. My grandmother Sita had discovered this family member's incestuous sexual relationship with Elizabeth. His relationship with Elizabeth had begun many years earlier when she was still a child. At her sentencing hearing, this family member testified, I quote, "I was particularly close to Elizabeth. I helped. I spent a lot of time bringing her up for the first 12 years of her life. I was the closest to her in age and probably spent more time with her than anyone else," unquote. Their relationship continued over the following years and eventually involved taking nude photographs. And my grandmother found those photographs. That's why they were discovered in her possession by the detectives. The story that the nude photographs were for my grandmother's hobby of painting watercolors is ridiculous and insulting. There were many of her paintings in her own house, and there were also some in my family's house growing up. My grandmother only painted landscapes and still lifes, never portraits or figures. So the nude photos had no connection to her artwork. The family member who had an incestuous sexual relationship with Elizabeth, on the other hand, was an avid photographer and artist. At the time, he had an expensive camera, which was later stolen. He's the one who took those photographs of Elizabeth. My grandmother Sita found those photographs, and it's this family member and Elizabeth who had the sexual intercourse on her marriage bed. This disgusted her so much that she had this marriage bed shipped at a very great expense from her house in Virginia to this family member's house in Alberta, Canada. This sort of action is commonly referred to as a fuck you move. Shipping the bed was the first piece of retaliation my grandmother took. She had also changed her will so that no member of her family who was alive at the time of her death would inherit anything from her. I received correspondence from my Uncle Howard about this again just recently. That was the second piece of my grandmother's retaliation. The third piece was a reduction of a loan. Shortly before the murders, the family member who had the incestuous sexual relationship with Elizabeth asked my grandparents for a loan of $50,000. He was unemployed at the time, and he and his family needed the money desperately. But my grandmother refused to give him a loan of that size, even though $50,000 was not a lot of money for her, as she was extremely wealthy. Instead, she and Derek gave him a loan of just $10,000, almost like a slap in the face. I believe she gave him this small sum only because this family member had children. The family member had also hated my grandparents going back to an incident in 1970. At this point, he could reasonably fear that she would not stop her retaliation. So she enlisted, so he enlisted his partner in the incestuous sexual relationship, which is Elizabeth, to help him. And he also recruited a second family member. This second family member hated Derek as much as the first family member hated Sita. The relationship had deteriorated into bitterness after Derek discovered this second family member's incestuous sexual relationship with another female of the family. This incestuous sexual relationship is widely known within the Haysom family. By contrast, the incestuous sexual relationship between the first family member and Elizabeth is not as widely known. Do you see, Governor, how sickening and perverse this all is? These are the family secrets that the Haysoms and Benedicts have been fighting to protect. But the worst secret is yet to come. Together, the two unnamed family members and Elizabeth killed Sita and Derek. Elizabeth drugged the alcohol. The first family member killed Sita, and the second family member killed Derek. This is the final and worst secret. Again, I've spent considerable time researching this case because the truth matters to me. Your staff can easily verify the points below. There is a forensic report linking the second family member to a piece of physical evidence at the crime scene. The first family member somehow obtained the fireplace poker that was found underneath Derek's body at the crime scene. I saw that fireplace poker in his house many times in my childhood and youth. This family member is proud of possessing it and still has it to this day. There are unidentified fingerprints on the alcohol glasses in the bar area that could be compared to these two family members. The nude photographs of Elizabeth were submitted into evidence at her sentencing hearing and placed under seal. They could be re-examined for fingerprints that could be compared to the two family members. Their serology and DNA reports on this case are available online. I've spent a great deal of time studying them, allowing me to summarize the findings for you here, Governor. There is blood from two unidentified men at the crime scene. One has blood group O, the other has blood group AB. DNA tests were not available at the time of the crime, but later DNA tests exclude Jens as the source of this blood. This was the basis of the pardon petition that was denied by Governor Northam in 2019. Jens's lawyer, Steve Northup, has spoken publicly about this puzzling decision by Mr. Northam. Mr. Northup believes that Governor's office based the denial of Jens's pardon petition on the theory that the O and AB blood samples might have been contaminated or mixed. For this reason, Jens and Mr. Northup asked Professor Tom McClintock of Liberty University to review the raw data of the DNA test to determine if the samples were pure or contaminated or mixed. Professor McClintock conducted his review of the DNA in 2022 in cooperation with the Department of Forensic Science. He concluded that the blood samples were definitely not mixed or contaminated. This confirms that two unidentified men left their unmixed, uncontaminated blood at the crime scene. Professor McClintock's report is the basis of Jens's new pardon petition submitted to you in 2023. You should grant this petition immediately because he is innocent. My information gives you two possible suspects whose DNA profiles could be compared to the blood samples from the crime scene. But to do that, you have to overturn Jens's conviction. Only this will make my grandparents' murders an open case again, allowing further forensic tests and search warrants. In cases like this, it is very common for the victims to be attacked by the perpetrators. This has already happened to me. In 2021, I confronted the family member who had sexually abused me. He broke down in tears and admitted being a pedophile. But the very next day, he contacted my employer to spread malicious false information about my character. I expected to be attacked by my perpetrators again, Governor, and I want you to be aware of that. As mentioned above, I'm concerned that the truth in this case may be swept under the rug again. This has already happened twice, first with the prosecutor Updike in court, then again with Governor Northam regarding Jens's first pardon petition. I'm willing to speak with your investigators. I also reserve the right to take this matter to the media, and I will not rest until these murderers are brought to justice, who are also pedophiles. I am also sending a copy of this letter to Jens Soering so he can attach it to his pardon petition. I consider him to be a victim of my family's incestuous sexual abuse because of my family used and abused him as the fall guy and scapegoat. Again, I urge you to grant him a full pardon so that this case can be reopened. Professor McClintock's work gives you all the scientific reasons you need. Sincerely, Sheena Roseanne Haysom. Thank you.